Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video. You join me in the studio today with this beautiful looking bike. It's the brand new 2024 BMW R1300GS. Now naturally I've been massively looking forward to getting hold of one of these ever since they came out a couple of months back, because not only is it a hugely important bike launch, given that this bike sells in such big volumes, but also it's like a major update with lots of tweaks and changes, and so there's plenty to get stuck into and test out when we ride it out on the road. So I thought I'd kick off this little series of videos with a full walk around of all the specs and details, and also along the way we'll touch on all of the optional extras that have been fitted to this particular press bike, because it's absolutely dripping in them, and it has to be said, the accessories catalogue is fairly extensive. So look, we'll go nose to tail with this walk around so we don't miss anything. And starting at the front wheel, we've actually got three choices of wheel with the new GS. So as standard, it comes with cast wheels, which are the most road biased. For about 450 quid extra, you can spec up these spoke wheels with either a gold rim or black, and they're a bit more robust, so more suitable for off-road riding. But top of the range is the 890 quid forged enduro wheels, and they say that they give you a bit of the best of both worlds. So they're strong like the spokes, but also pretty lightweight. They're 1.8 kilograms lighter than the spoke wheels per set, and so that should give you the quickness of handling that you'll get with something like the cast wheels. For me though, call me vain, but I think I prefer the spoke wheels because of the way they look. And also you might have noticed this green and gold paint job, and that's because this is the Option 719 Tramuntana edition, and so these gold spoke wheels are bundled in with that, although you might hope so, because I think it's just over 2,200 quid for this package. Now, as with the previous generation 1250GS, it's a 19-incher at the front and a 17 at the rear, and so that should give it a nice balance of on-road and off-road ability. And you've also got a few options of tyres that you can spec up at the dealer. So this is on Michelin Anarchy Adventures, which are, I think, still primarily road biased, but they do have a deep tread that will give them a little bit of gentle off-road ability for dry trails and easy gravel and that sort of thing. Then you can also get it with Metzeler Tourance Next 2s, which are much more road focused. Effectively, they're an adventure touring tyre. Or at the opposite end of the spectrum, the Metzeler Karoo 4s, which are a bit deeper in the tread than these, and so probably the most off-road biased of the bunch. Now, I'll add up the cost of all the extras on this bike so we get a total price at the end, but you know, it's not cheap, and so I'd be very reluctant, I think, if I owned one and it was my own money, to take it off-road. So I think I'd probably be speccing those Metzeler Tourance Next 2s. They're going to give you the best road handling, of course, although I do appreciate that this slightly chunkier design does help with the aesthetics a bit. All of them are tubeless. You can see even with these spoked wheels that they lace to the edges, so they're sealed. So that does mean that if you do get a puncture, you can fix it quickly and easily at the roadside with a plug. And there is tire pressure monitoring as well, so you'll know about it very quickly because you'll get a warning up there on the dash. Now moving back from there a little bit, we've got the front brakes. So it's a pair of 4-piston radially mounted calipers on dual 310mm discs. And then at the rear, a 285mm disc with a 2-pot caliper, so a nice big disc, and that should offer plenty of stopping power, which is ideal if you're riding 2 up with luggage, for example. Now you'll notice the BMW logo on the outside of the calipers up front here, but if you look on the inside, they're actually Brembo branded, so that's who makes them on BMW's behalf. And the standard brakes, I think, are finished in black with a white BMW logo, but this particular bike has the bare metal finish with the red BMW logo, and that's because this is fitted with the sports brake upgrade. That's part of the dynamic package, which I think is about £1,600, and it really focuses on sportiness. So it gives you the up and down quick shifter, the extra dynamic pro riding modes, and also the dynamic suspension adjustment. But yeah, with these upgraded calipers, they say you're getting slightly better performance and also slightly less weight, and I do think they add to the looks a little bit as well. As for the electronics on the brakes, well, you've got one of the longest names for ABS I've ever heard. They say it's BMW Motorrad Full Integral ABS Pro, and so naturally it's their latest and greatest in terms of ABS. It's lean sensitive and all that stuff, but the full integral part of the name references the fact that it's now a link braking setup. So that means if you're using the front brake lever, for example, up on the bars there, you're going to get a little bit of stopping power from both the front and rear brakes, and it's the same for the rear brake pedal as well. The idea idea is that it's going to generally reduce stopping distances, and I have found on the more recent link braking systems that I've tried on other bikes, it's been, you know, not that noticeable, not a negative thing in terms of the riding experience. And they do also say that in the off-road bias riding modes like the Enduro mode, you can sort of switch it off on the rear so that it gives you the ability to slide the back end. On top of that, you've got the dynamic brake control, which kills the throttle when you're decelerating heavily, and that means you're not going to accidentally give it a twist if you're gripping onto the brake lever trying to come to a stop. And also the dynamic brake light control, I think it's called, which is a system that flashes the rear brakes, again under heavy braking, and the idea with that is to warn drivers or riders behind you so that you can hopefully avoid a rear end shunt. Now also from the shots of the levers and that sort of area on the bars, you might have noticed the fact that those levers and reservoir caps are this fancy sort of anodized billet construction, and that's because they're part of the Option 719 billet pack, which comes as part of the Option 719 Tramuntana edition. Thing is, they do look quite fancy, but I will say I really like the feel and contour of the brake and clutch levers. And also they've got some nice, easy adjustability as well. So you may actually want to consider them from a practical perspective, as well as the way that they add a bit of bling. So yeah, I think even from just looking at the braking system, you can see how advanced this bike is and full of features, because there's so many ways you can spec it up and lots of interesting technological intervention as well. Moving up from there, we've got the suspension, and at the front end, with it being a GS, naturally you've got the telelever design. And so as opposed to a regular telescopic fork, this actually uses a sort of wishbone swing arm type thing that's suspended on a monoshock. If you're not really familiar with it, then I'd definitely recommend reading up a bit, but the general idea is that it separates braking, turning and suspension forces, and that leads to this really nice ride quality that's typical of the GS and makes it brilliant over distance, and also gives you a certain lightness to the steering. In fact, it really does give the GS this signature handling characteristic and comfort. And on this particular bike, it's their latest and greatest Evo telelever system, which has a few advancements. They've played with the structure inside with regards to the bearings and the steerer shaft, and that means that it's super rigid and also precise in the handling. And then they've actually also decoupled the handlebar from the top yoke with this flexible plate, and that means that the bars tilt less under acceleration and braking while still retaining the ability to turn the bars. Now, like I say, with the dynamic package, you get the DSA or dynamic suspension adjustment, and that's basically their fancy name for semi-active electronically adjustable suspension. So it's constantly adjusting in real time to suit the current riding conditions and riding style. And so if you're cruising along steady at a constant speed, it'll probably soften up for a little bit more comfort. And then in real time, it can firm things up when things get a little more sporty to give you that handling bias. Thing is though, this bike is particularly impressive because although this tech is fairly common across the motorcycle market, certainly in the large capacity adventure segment, every other bike just uses damping adjustment, whereas this bike can actually vary the spring rate as well. You'll see there's a really long piggyback reservoir on the rear shock, and that's because it contains some extra springs in the bottom there, and an electronic valve can open them up and bring them into play, and when that happens, you get a 20% increase, I think, in spring rate. So that means it's got a wider range of adjustment, and it should be able to find a better setting for a wider range of scenarios, especially when you consider adding in stuff like a passenger and luggage. And so I'm really looking forward to finding out how this bike feels out on the road. Now, another new suspension feature that this particular bike is fitted with is the adaptive ride height. I think this comes in at just under 500 quid. And the idea is that when you come to a standstill, it'll lower down by about 30 millimeters. And that's going to make it easier to get your feet down and get them planted so you feel nice and secure. If you're a little bit short in the leg, or you're, a bit cautious when you've got the bike fully loaded up, then this is going to look very, very appealing. And I guess the benefit over a standard lowering kit is it means that the bike pops back up when you're on the move to an optimal ride height with full suspension travel and ground clearance. Now, this happens automatically in most riding modes. You can play with the settings though and also do it manually through the switch gear. And the other thing that sounds super impressive is what they call a jack up tool, which I think increases the ride height, and that's to make it easier to get the bike onto its center stand. Lastly, on the suspension front, there's also a sports suspension package, and when they say sports, they're referring to sports of the off-road variety, because it gives you 20mm more travel. So there's 190 as standard on the front, that goes up to 210, and 200 on the rear, which goes up to 220. Now it also gives you a firmer spring rate as well to, you know, deal with those bigger impacts and more challenging workloads. And so certainly if you do fancy taking this bike off-road extensively, at about 340 quid, this is probably a worthwhile upgrade. Now moving up here to the lighting, and we've got this sort of new LED design with a small headlight in the middle and then the X in the daytime running lights, and I think it was quite a controversial feature. Certainly when the bike was first announced, it's a big departure from that sort of asymmetrical design that was a bit of a signature feature on the GS. But I think now that it's had a little bit of time to bed in, it actually does look quite good. And also, as you'd expect, it's got all the latest tech. So this particular bike has the Innovation Pack. This one comes in at just over £1,000, and it includes Headlight Pro, which I'll talk about in a sec, and also the front and rear facing radars, which open up a whole bunch of extra safety features. Now, Headlight Pro is their name for their cornering headlight, and so that means when the bike's banked over, it's gonna angle into the turn and illuminate the inside of the corner. And so the idea is you get much better visibility of any hazards on the road surface, for example. As for the indicators, well, they're integrated into the handguards as standard there. I think that might be a bit of a pain if you're riding extensively off-road, because undoubtedly the handguards are going to take a bit of a battering, and so I assume this makes it a little bit more expensive to replace. Also, if you want to put more robust handguards on, I'm not quite sure what you'll do with relocating the indicators, but I will say they do look very sleek. It helps with the sort of aesthetic of the front end, and also with the position being so high up and wide of the headlight, it does make it very clear as to which direction you're turning. At the rear, we've got the integrated tail lights and indicators, and it does look very tidy, and you're starting to see this more and more on the motorcycle market at the moment. KTM, for example, recently announced a few bikes with it, but I will say I kind of miss the look of a single tail and brake light in the middle, and my gut feeling is that that would still give you a bit more visibility and look more obvious to drivers. Still, I'm sure BMW have done their research, but let me know which you prefer down in the comments. Now, as for the paint jobs that are available, which you'll see along the beak and the tank covers there, you know, this, like I say, is the Tramuntana edition, so you get this green and gold. It really does have a nice metallic sort of sheen to it. And I think after seeing this one in the flesh, it might be my pick of the bunch, but I also do quite like the standard base model, which just comes in white. And of course, you can save yourself a bit of cash if you do opt for that one. On top of that, for 830 quid, you've got the GS Trophy Edition. And BMWs, for me, always look great in this sort of blue, red and white. And with that edition, you do get a couple of extras thrown in, like the black spoke wheels. Then you've got another 830 quid option, which is the triple black. So nice and stealthy, and this one is more road focused. So it sticks with the cast wheels, but it gets you the comfort seat, the pillion package, the center stand and the electronically adjustable windscreen. And so it should make for a nice cozy experience out on the road. But yeah, for me, I think I'd either go for this one or the standard white bike with the black spoke wheel spectre. But let me know your pick down in the comments below. Now look, let's talk about the tech package a little bit on this bike. Like I say, we've got the Innovation Pack, and so that gives us the radars at either end. And that opens up active cruise control, so the bike will follow the traffic in front at a set distance. Front collision warnings, which will give you a light in the mirrors, I believe, and also a pulsing vibe through the bars if it thinks you're going to run into something. And also, if the situation's getting really quite dangerous, then the bike can, if you've got it enabled, intervene with the brakes. And then lastly, the radar at the rear gives you blind spot warnings, or I think they call them lane change warnings, but effectively if someone's sat off to one side in your rear three-quarter, it's going to warn you with the lights again on the mirrors on the respective side. Now, I've tried out BMW's active cruise control on the RT before and on the R18s, and for me, it was really impressive. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great tool out on a busy motorway. And so I'm really looking forward to testing out this more comprehensive and feature-laden system, which one assumes is going to be coming to more and more BMWs as we move forward. Now, you can manage all this through the 6.5-inch color TFT display. And personally, I really like the design and layout of the graphics on BMW dashes. And maybe it's not for everybody, but I also don't mind the little jog wheel on the left-hand side here. I think it makes it very easy to get through the menus without having to move your thumb particularly far over from the grips. Now through this you can manage all the riding modes, so as standard you've got Eco, Rain, Road and Enduro for a bit of off-roading. And like I say, because this bike's got the Dynamic pack, that opens up 3 extra modes of Dynamic, Dynamic Pro and also Enduro Pro, and those are going to offer a little bit more customizability for more advanced riding. Now all of these affect traction control, wheelie control, ABS, rear wheel lift, throttle response, engine braking, dynamic brake control, the dynamic suspension if you've got it, and also the adaptive ride height. And so yeah, it's enough to get your mind spinning a bit, but I'm hoping it'll feel much more intuitive out on the road when you just set it to the appropriate mode. On top of that, you've got a new sport layout on the screen, which gives you more sporty stuff like a big clear rev indicator. You can get lean angle on there. You can get the amount of braking and traction control intervention. And of course, you've got Bluetooth connectivity, so you can hook it up to your phone and a headset. And that means you can control music and calls and navigation features all through the switchgear and dash. There's even a handy little phone stash here, and what I will say is my big iPhone Pro Max in a chunky-ish case, when I tested out the phone stash on the RT recently, it wouldn't quite fit, but they've made this nice and big, and so this big boy will fit in there, which is great to know. The other option though, if you want easy access to your phone, if you have any connection problems, and also the extra screen space, is just to fit it to your bars. And so this is a great opportunity at which to give a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Quad Lock. In my experience, they make the best motorcycle phone mounts in the business. And on this particular bike, I'm using their CNC Aluminium Handlebar Mount Pro, which has a really nice premium feel to it. And I've paired that with their vibration dampener to make sure that you don't get any harmful vibes damaging your phone from the road or engine. On top of that, we've got the wireless charging head Pro, so that keeps the phone charged up without ever having to plug it in. And I've just run that with a USB cable into the phone compartment there, which has a USB socket inside. If you don't have one of these though, you can easily run it with their smart charger under the tank to the battery under the seat. And the great thing about that is that it monitors the battery's level of charge and stops drawing power if it ever goes below a certain level, so it never flats your battery. Then I've also got their mag case, which has this really simple magnetic mounting for other applications. And so that means I can use it in loads of other places, like on their magnetic desk mount or in the car. And they've got a huge ecosystem of mounts that has stuff for cyclists and pilots and helicopter pilots. So there's pretty much a mount to suit all situations. Genuinely, I love using this, and so I'd thoroughly recommend it. And if you check out the link down in the description, you'll also find down there a discount code specifically for my viewers, which will get you money off anything you buy from their website. So once again, a massive thanks to Quad Lock for their support, and with that, back to the bike. Now moving on to the handlebars, and we've got this sort of gold finish on these that's part of the Tramuntana edition, so I think it does tie in quite nicely with the rest of the bike, and naturally you've got this big, wide, commanding riding position that gives you lots of leverage. On top of that, heated grips now come as standard, which is a nice feature, along with also the keyless ignition, which ties into the fuel filler and the steering lock. And then also, because this bike has the touring pack fitted, I can't remember how much that one costs, but I'll flash it up on the screen now. You get some extra deflectors like here at the front, and also these ones above the handguards. Now in my experience, heated grips are not half as effective if you get in loads of wind blast. And so for me, this is definitely something that I'd be looking to spec up. Now, with the bar position, I don't see any real adjustability as standard. It's not like you can flip the risers because you've got this rather complicated Evo telelever design with the flex plate. But there are some options in the accessories catalog, like the Enduro package, which specs the bike up a bit for more of a bias towards off-roading. And that includes some 30mm risers that are going to make it feel more comfortable when you're stood up. Also, there's a comfort bar which is up and back, and they say that one in particular is great for smaller or shorter riders to lessen the reach forward to the bars, and so you're going to find it slightly more natural feeling. For me though, at 5'9" or 175 centimeters, this feels kind of natural, and of course you can always rotate the bars back and forth to get a little bit of adjustment there. Now the windscreen as part of that touring pack is electric, and let me show you, there is quite a decent range of adjustment here. And not only that, but you can go between two positions with the bolts here, so you can have it even lower. I've got it in the higher position because I quite like a lot of wind protection out on the motorway, for example. And look, while we're here, there's one thing I really like in the cockpit, which is on the left-hand switchgear here, you've got a rocker switch, and there's a button above it that means that you can assign different features to that particular switch. So at the moment, I've got it set for the electronic windscreen, but you can also assign it to the heated grips and seat, the active cruise control distance, the traction control settings, the damping of the suspension, or even the adaptive ride height. And so I really like that you can assign the most valuable feature for the current riding situation to this really easy to use switch. Now moving back a bit here, we've got the fuel tank, and this is actually 19 litres in capacity, which is 1 litre less than the previous gen 1250GS. On top of that, fuel consumption has also gone up a little bit too, so it's 4.8 litres now instead of 4.75 per 100 kilometres travelled. And no doubt that's down to the fact that you've got a bigger, more powerful engine now. Thing is though, it's still super efficient versus the competition. If you stack it up against stuff like the Tiger 1200 or certainly the Multistrada V4, which is really quite thirsty, then this bike looks excellent on fuel. And I'm sure that's partly down to the fact that it uses their shift cam variable valve timing and lift system, which can operate on a less aggressive cam at lower revs to bias more so towards fuel efficiency and torque, and then flick over to the more aggressive cam when you need that top end power. So yeah, slightly less range than the previous generation, but still way more than the competition. And I'm sure that if range is really important to your buying decision, then you're probably going to be waiting for the 1300 update to the GS Adventure anyway. Now moving on down here, you can see this radically different frame design versus the previous generation, which used tubular steel, because you've now got a sheet steel construction for the main frame and then a cast aluminium subframe. The benefit of doing this is they say that it's got better rigidity, they can optimize it for weight, and also they can play with the packaging of the bike a little bit as well. Although I will say that the downside is potentially on the looks front, where it has to be said it looks a bit less rugged and utilitarian. I'm not saying that it's necessarily worse looking, it's definitely growing on me quite a bit, but maybe that sort of two-wheel Jeep kind of vibe really does suit the adventure market, and so that's why maybe some people are mourning the loss a bit of that sort of more robust looking design, of which the steel trellis played a bit of a part. Still, weight is down quite a bit. It's 237 kilograms now wet, and that's 12 kilos less than the previous generation, so you can't really argue with that. And I'm expecting it to feel quite a lot more nimble out on the road. It's also worth adding that's very competitive versus the competition. Now another big weight saving came from this new engine design. They say 3.9 kilograms from the engine alone, and 6.5 if you include the whole powertrain, so I guess the gearbox and potentially the paralever shaft drive at the back as well. Impressive, because that's over half of the total weight savings alone, and at the same time they've taken the opportunity to give it more capacity and therefore more performance. So you've got 9 more horsepower peak to take it up to 145, and also 6 more newton meters of peak torque, and that occurs at pretty much the same revs for both those figures. Now that usable mid-range has always made the GS feel quite surprisingly fast to me, certainly at road speeds and a little bit beyond. And so I'm expecting more of the same, but just with that little bit extra. Now the comfort seat and the pillion package come as standard on the Tramuntana edition, and it really is a nice squishy seat. It sits at 850mm in terms of height, and it's non-adjustable. Quite often with adventure bikes you can put them between 2 settings, but this one is fixed. Although it is worth adding that there are options in the accessories catalogue for both lower and higher. And also remember, this bike does have the adaptive ride height, which takes it down by 30mm at a stop, so it's right down at 820, which should be accessible for most riders. As for the pillion package, where you've got the comfort seat, you've got the top case rack, which gives you more opportunities to grab on, I suppose, and also some bigger, chunkier foot pegs that have got removable rubbers, so you can keep them in to keep the vibes down on the road, but also take them off if you want a little bit more grip. Now an interesting feature here is that you can toggle the passenger seat between 2 positions, so I suppose when it's forward it gives you a little bit more support for the rider, but also when you move it back, you've got a bit more space for the passenger. And this bike has the heated seats fitted both front and rear. I think it's 150 quid, which doesn't seem too bad versus some of the other upgrades. And the passenger's got their own dedicated control on the side here, whereas the rider controls it through the buttons on the switchgear. Now I did pop the seat off the other day just to have a little look under there, and I will say I think there's a bit less space for fitting accessories and stuff like that versus the 1250GS. So if you do like to fit a lot of aftermarket, you know, electronics and stuff like that, dash cams maybe, then you might have to think a little bit harder about how to fit it all under there. And then this touring pack is rounded off with the luggage mounting points. So I've already talked about this top case, but also you've got the mounting points on the side here, and you'll notice these little blanks that cover up an electronic connection, and that's because they're new Vario cases, which are expandable. You turn a knob and you can make them bigger or smaller. Also have inside a USB charging point for your devices, a little light in there as well so you can see what you're doing in there even when it's dark. And also on top of that, it ties into the keyless system so that they're centrally locking. So very advanced in terms of luggage and quite impressive. In fact, it's a bit of a shame it wasn't on this press bike because I really would have liked to have checked those out. Now down here we've got the foot controls of course, and like I say with this option 719 package, they do look a little bit fancy. And while I do like the foot controls and the fact that they're quite easy to adjust, so if you're going between sitting and standing and off-roading, then that's quite a nice feature to have. I do find these foot pegs a little bit small and it doesn't quite have that planted adventure bike feel that I'm used to. Take a look at the passenger pegs, for example. There's much more space on them and it spreads out the pressure a bit better. And so even if I had this 719 package fitted, I think I'd be looking for pegs that are a bit more like this, that offer some more support. Still, they're probably perfectly fine for the road. And then also down here, we've got the center stand, which like I say, comes as part of that touring package. Moving back, we've got the new silencer, which looks really quite compact. And I guess they've done that by moving more of the catalyzer and stuff under the belly of the bike at the back there. You can also see there's some sort of control valve, so you've got a couple of wires running into a valve thing on the exhaust system there, so I'm interested to see if that affects the sound at different levels of revs. And yeah, I really like the look of it. I appreciate the fact that you get a better view of this beautiful single-sided rear wheel with this smaller silencer. Although there is, in the accessories catalogue, at close to £1,000, the option to fit this sort of double silencer that's designed by Akropovich, which really does look quite nice. I can't imagine it adds a great deal in terms of performance, but it does, I think, add something to the looks, and so really it's up to you as to whether that's worth it. Finishing off the rear end, we've got, like I say, the single-sided rear wheel, which really does look quite nice, especially with these gold rims. That's driven, of course, through their paralever shaft drive system, and this is also a new Evo version of that, which they say is a little bit stiffer. The same Michelin Anarchy Adventure tires, of course, and then the little extra mudguard here to keep a bit of spray off your back. So look, I spec'd that all up on the configurator to try and get a rough idea of price, and I think it comes in at £22,545, assuming I haven't missed anything. That really is quite a lot of money, of course, and it makes it about £7 more than the standard bike in its most basic spec. That's enough to buy another entire motorcycle. You could have a great little fun bike like a Honda Hornet, for example. And so I'd love to know from you whether you think it's worth it, or would you just take the standard bike and buy something else with the spare change? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Hit subscribe if you've not already, if you want to see my full review of this bike and some of the riding footage. In fact, I'm going to take it out for a spin right now and publish a sort of first ride, first impressions over on my vlogs channel. So I'll put that on the screen as soon as it's ready so you can give it a click and give it a watch. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.